girlfriend told me it was over because her new man was taking her to Paris. She had no idea. Her new man was my intern, and I was about to make their trip a living nightmare. I never thought a simple Tuesday could ruin my entire week, month, hell, maybe even my life, depending on how long it took me to recover from what happened. But there I was, sitting on the edge of my bed, phone in hand, staring at a message that made my stomach feel like it had been replaced with lead. Her name was Clara, my girlfriend of 3 years, the girl I'd shared my apartment with, my mornings, my Netflix passwords, my bad habit of drinking way too much coffee and hogging the couch. She was everything I thought a person could be for me. Smart, funny, infuriatingly stubborn, and beautiful in a way that made the world seem softer whenever she was around. And I really thought we were solid. Like, unshakable. I remember that morning vividly. I woke up to the smell of burnt toast, groggy but smiling because I knew Clara was in the kitchen trying to perfect her signature breakfast, eggs that always came out slightly overcooked. I shuffled out of bed, rubbing my eyes, and peered into the living room, where she was humming, flipping eggs with that little flourish she always did. And for a moment, I felt that warm, content bubble of normalcy. I thought about how good things were, how lucky I was. Then my phone buzzed. I didn't think much of it at first. It was just a notification, a harmless ping, but the second I saw her name flashing on the screen, I knew. That little instinct in your gut that says, something's wrong, screamed. I swiped. Hey, we need to talk. I'm sorry, but it's over. I'm leaving for Paris with my new man. I read it once, twice, 3 times. Then I threw the phone onto the bed like it had bitten me. My brain refused to process the words. My stomach tightened. My hands trembled. Paris? New man? I muttered aloud, my voice catching somewhere between disbelief and fury. For a solid 5 minutes, I just sat there, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself it wasn't real. Maybe it was a joke. Maybe she'd sent it to the wrong person. Or maybe I was still dreaming and any second I'd wake up and she'd be there, making burnt toast again. But she wasn't. She wasn't going to be. I felt a surge of anger that was almost physical. Not at the new man, that name, that stupid casual way she wrote it. It was too cruel, but at her. At the way she could type out 3 sentences that destroyed everything we'd built without a single backward glance. I grabbed my phone again, fingers fumbling as I typed and deleted. I had to respond, had to say something, anything, that might make her see reason, make her stop, make her stay. But nothing I wrote seemed to carry the right weight. Desperation tasted bitter on my tongue, and it made me sick. Finally, I typed something neutral, something measured. I don't remember exactly what it said. Something like, "Are you serious? Why?" and sent it. I didn't get a reply. I didn't need one. I spent the rest of the day moving around my apartment like a ghost. Every corner held memories. The couch where we binge-watched Stranger Things, the kitchen counter she leaned on while laughing at my terrible jokes, the bedroom where she'd thrown her head back and laughed so hard that I couldn't help but laugh with her. And all of it felt tainted now, like the paint on the walls had been sprayed with invisible poison. I drank a lot of coffee that day. I made a few calls, to my brother, to my closest friend, but I couldn't even bring myself to explain what had happened. The words wouldn't fit. Even speaking them out loud seemed like betraying the intensity of the betrayal. Clara left me for some guy in Paris sounded absurd, cartoonish, and yet it was the absolute brutal truth. Night came, and with it that suffocating loneliness that only betrayal can bring. I couldn't sleep. I walked around the apartment, thinking, spinning, analyzing. And here's the thing about me. I'm not a planner by nature. I'm not someone who usually concocts schemes or plots revenge. But there's something about this situation, the audacity of her actions, the casual cruelty of calling someone your new man like he's a trophy, that lit a spark in me. A small, calculating, dark spark. I realized something then. I realized that this wasn't just heartbreak. This wasn't just a girl leaving me for someone else. This was an opportunity. I know how that sounds, like I'm some cold sociopath, but I'm not. I love Clara. I still loved her in the chaotic, messy, irrational way you love someone who's become your center. But love doesn't erase betrayal. And betrayal demands consequences. So I started thinking about the new man, about Paris, about her plans, about the fact that she didn't think twice about me, about us, about everything we'd shared. And then it hit me like a thunderbolt. I know who her new man is. I froze. The world around me seemed to tilt just for a second. I blinked. I read the text again, trying to convince myself it couldn't be true. But deep down, I already knew. Her new man wasn't some stranger, some guy she met at a cafe or swiped right on Tinder. No, he was someone much closer to me, someone I trusted, someone who had been around, someone who had been helping me for months without me even realizing how perfect he was for this little plan I didn't even know I was cooking up yet. It was Alex. My intern. Yeah, my intern. The kid I hired last year because he had ambition, a bit of talent, and a willingness to learn. The kid I spent countless hours mentoring, guiding, teaching. The kid who looked up to me like I was some kind of idol. Alex, who had been nothing but loyal, dependable, oblivious to the chaos brewing just beyond his radar. I felt a flicker of amusement, quickly swallowed by anger. Clara had no idea. She had no idea that the guy she thought was her shiny new fling, the one whisking her off to Paris with promises of romance and adventure, was someone I'd been cultivating trust with, someone completely under my radar. And just like that, the narrative shifted. Heartbreak didn't feel as heavy anymore. Fear didn't cloud my mind. Anger became focused, sharp. It wasn't about despair anymore. It was about opportunity. I didn't text Clara back. Not yet. I didn't call her. Not yet. I needed information. I needed context. I needed to know how much she knew about Alex, how much Alex knew about her intentions. And most importantly, I needed to think clearly, coldly, strategically. I spent that night pacing, thinking like a chess player, like someone who knew he was suddenly playing a game he hadn't expected to join. Clara had made the first move, but I was about to make the next, and let me tell you, checkmate was going to be brutal. The next morning, I started gathering everything I knew about their plans. Flight times, hotel reservations, Parisian hotspots, restaurants she had bragged about visiting on Instagram. Every little detail became a piece of a puzzle, and I realized something terrifyingly exhilarating. She had walked right into my hands. By the end of that week, I had a plan forming. Not a vague idea, no, this was precise. I was going to let Clara and Alex think they were in control, that they were living some perfect, romantic Parisian fantasy. And I was going to watch it unravel from the shadows every step, every moment. I know what you're thinking. That's extreme. That's psychotic. Maybe it is. Maybe it isn't. You can judge me later. Right now, all that mattered was the fact that Clara had underestimated me. She thought she could break my heart, skip off to Paris with her shiny new man, and leave me in the dust. She had no idea that her new man was my intern, my loyal, unsuspecting pawn in a game she didn't even know existed. And that was the thing. That realization, that spark of possibility, was the only thing keeping me from falling apart completely. Heartbreak still throbbed in my chest like a drum. Betrayal still tasted bitter on my tongue. But there was a sliver of something else, something darkly satisfying, creeping in. Control. I could almost see it, laid out in my mind like a movie storyboard. Paris, Clara laughing, Alex fumbling, and me, somewhere behind the scenes, orchestrating chaos without her knowing a thing. The thought made me grin, quietly, to myself. And so I sat there, alone in my apartment, staring at the city lights outside my window, and made a decision. I wasn't going to let this go. I wasn't going to crumble. I was going to take this heartbreak, this betrayal, and turn it into something else entirely. Something that Clara and Alex would never forget. Paris was coming, and so was my chance. After the initial shock of Clara's message wore off, my mind went into overdrive. That first night, I had allowed myself a few hours of raw, chaotic emotion, anger, heartbreak, disbelief. But once the adrenaline of betrayal settled in, something else took over. Something colder, sharper, more calculating. I needed to know everything. Not just about Clara, not just about Paris, but about the so-called new man who had apparently replaced me in her life. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I already had an inkling. That name kept gnawing at me, refusing to let go. Alex. My intern, Alex. The guy who had been under my radar for months, who had been learning from me, shadowing me, helping me with projects, and apparently helping Clara with a life-altering betrayal without even realizing it. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling, and let the pieces fall into place. Alex had always been observant, diligent, eager to impress me. He had that mix of innocence and ambition that made him perfect for the kind of subtle manipulation I had in mind. But right now, he was blissfully unaware. He was, in every sense, my unwitting pawn. It wasn't immediate. I didn't storm into the office that next morning or confront him about anything. That would have been amateurish. No, the first step was observation. I needed context. I needed to know how deep their relationship ran, what Clara had told him, what his perception of her or of me was. And because Alex trusted me completely, this wasn't going to be difficult. I started small, casual questions, innocuous comments. Hey, how's Clara doing? She okay with all the Paris plans? Alex didn't suspect a thing. He laughed. She's over the moon. I think she's really excited about the trip. Honestly, man, I've never seen her this happy. I nodded, forcing a neutral smile, my mind racing. Good, good. She deserves to be happy. On the surface, I was supportive. Beneath it, I was already plotting every detail. I spent the next few days digging into everything I could about their Paris plans. Flight times, hotels, restaurants, sightseeing tours. Clara had been careless, or perhaps just too caught up in her excitement to hide any of it online. Instagram posts, Facebook check-ins, a couple of public tweets with vague hashtags, hash Paris vibes, hash love in the air. Every little clue was a thread, and I began pulling, unraveling the picture piece by piece. At the same time, I took a walk down memory lane with Alex. I remembered the long hours we had spent together at the office, the mentoring sessions, the coffees he drank while we brainstormed, the subtle ways he tried to impress me, to earn my trust. I realized that all this time, I had been unknowingly training him to be the perfect instrument in this coming symphony of chaos. Every time he took on responsibility without questioning, every time he deferred to my judgment, every time he smiled and said, "Got it, boss," I had been sharpening his reliability for the exact moment I needed it most. I know it sounds manipulative, maybe it is, but in that moment, with my heart still bruised from Claire's betrayal, it felt like poetic justice. I had been wronged, and now, for the first time, I had leverage. I began subtly shaping Alex's interactions with Clara. I offered advice under the guise of professional mentorship. Remember to double check the hotel reservation, I'd say casually, or make sure she knows about the travel insurance. Paris can get tricky this time of year. Innocuous, harmless on the surface, but each suggestion planted tiny seeds that I could nurture later. I watched him take them seriously, implementing them diligently, blissfully unaware of how each small decision would eventually serve my purpose. Meanwhile, I started constructing the mental blueprint for what I planned to do in Paris. I knew I couldn't just waltz into their lives and confront them immediately. That would ruin the suspense, ruin the impact. I needed to operate from the shadows, carefully controlling the chaos, manipulating events without them ever realizing the hand guiding it all. Step 1. Establish my presence discreetly. Flights, accommodations, local contacts. I arranged everything so that I could be nearby without appearing on their radar. I became a ghost in their romantic fantasy, the invisible string puller behind the scenes. Step 2. Create small, believable inconveniences. Nothing too extreme at first. Paris is beautiful, but also unpredictable. I would start with minor frustrations. Delayed taxis, miscommunications with hotel staff, double-booked restaurant reservations. The goal wasn't destruction, it was disorientation. To make Clara start questioning her choices, her judgment, even Alex's reliability. Step 3. Psychological nudges. I wanted her to feel subtly undermined. A slightly wrong direction from a map app, a confusing note left at the hotel, small hints of mismanagement that Alex couldn't possibly anticipate. Everything designed to erode confidence, build tension, and make her see that the perfect romantic fantasy was actually a fragile illusion. Step 4. Observation. From a distance, I would watch reactions, note patterns, refine strategies. Alex would continue executing tasks diligently, oblivious to the fact that he was now a critical piece of a much larger plan. Clara would start seeing cracks in her Parisian dream, all while thinking she was still in control. As the days passed, I began documenting everything in my mind. Notes, strategies, contingencies. I wasn't just planning for the sake of revenge. I was orchestrating a story, a sequence of events that would reveal itself naturally, each incident building on the last until the final crescendo of shock and revelation. And yes, I admit it, I started enjoying the planning. There was a thrill in knowing that, while Clara had thought she was making a bold, independent choice, she had actually stepped into a scenario completely mapped out by someone she had underestimated. The thrill was electric. The anger and heartbreak had transformed into something sharper, something more focused, anticipation. I remember one night sitting alone with my laptop, cross-referencing flight schedules and hotel reservations. Alex had mentioned that they were taking the early morning flight from Charles de Gaulle, booking into some boutique hotel in Le Marais. Perfect. I made mental notes, arrival times, concierge names, local attractions they planned to visit. Every piece of information was ammunition. Then came the final piece of preparation, my own trip. I booked a flight under the radar, choosing staggered schedules and indirect routes that would make my arrival discreet but timely. I reserved a small, centrally located apartment, one that offered excellent vantage points over the areas they planned to visit. From there, I could operate with near total anonymity, maintaining my shadow presence while watching events unfold. Even as I organized logistics, I rehearsed scenarios in my head. What if Clara tried to assert herself? What if Alex noticed something odd? I had contingencies for everything, backup plans, alternative routes, plausible excuses, diversions. I wasn't leaving anything to chance. Every moment, every reaction, every movement was accounted for in the architecture of my revenge. And then, when everything was mapped, rehearsed, and in motion, I sat back and let myself smile. Not a triumphant, gloating smile. Not yet, but a subtle, almost imperceptible one. This wasn't just revenge. This was artistry. Clara had taken what she thought was her bold, romantic leap. She had stepped into a meticulously crafted labyrinth, and I was already waiting in the shadows, quietly guiding the walls. The final thrill of it all? Alex, my loyal intern, completely unaware of the role he was about to play. He had been my trusted ally, my student, my protege, and soon, unknowingly, he would become the instrument through which I dismantled the illusion of Clara's perfect Paris escape. Every instruction I had given him, every bit of guidance, every casual piece of advice, it had all been laying the groundwork. For the first time since the breakup, I felt powerful. Not in a vindictive, petty way. Not in a way that felt cruel for cruelty's sake, but in the way someone feels when they realize they hold all the cards, when the chaos of someone else's choices can be guided without their awareness, when betrayal is met with strategy, not despair. And so I waited. Not passively, but in that intense, anticipatory state where every plan is rehearsed, every contingency considered, and every possibility accounted for. Paris was coming. Clara and Alex were coming, and when they arrived, they would walk right into the trap I had set. I didn't know how it would all unfold yet. I didn't know the exact reactions, the exact moments when panic, confusion, or humiliation would take hold, but I did know this. By the time it was over, Clara would never forget the consequences of underestimating me. Alex would learn that loyalty can be weaponized, and I would finally have a chance to turn heartbreak into something exquisitely satisfying. Paris wasn't just a destination, it was a stage, and I was the unseen director. Paris smelled like promise and danger at the same time. There was the usual perfume of croissants and coffee drifting from corner cafes, the faint exhaust from taxis, the crisp, cool air that carried the kind of romance the movies always promised, but reality rarely delivered. I landed just as the sun was dipping behind the Eiffel Tower, casting long, golden shadows over the Seine, and for anyone else, it would have been magical. But for me, magic had been replaced with calculation. I had spent weeks planning this trip in my mind, rehearsing every detail, every possible encounter, every variable. My flight was staggered a few hours ahead of Clara and Alex's, giving me the luxury of a quiet arrival. I took my time through customs, collected my luggage, and slipped into a taxi that wound through the streets of Paris like a silent predator, observing, absorbing, memorizing every landmark, every cafe, every hotel along their projected route. My apartment for the week was small but perfectly located. A modest rental with a narrow balcony overlooking a street lined with cafes and boutiques. It gave me the perfect vantage point, and I set it up as a base of operations. From here, I could move freely, orchestrating the unfolding chaos without ever being seen. It was a subtle thrill, knowing that Clara and Alex had no idea I was already here. They thought they were walking into a romantic adventure, unaware that every step of the way, I would be a ghost manipulating events from the shadows. By the time I unpacked, I had already gone over the plan a dozen times in my head. Small inconveniences first, psychological nudges second, and eventually the subtle disintegration of Claire's confidence, all while keeping myself invisible. And then there was Alex, my loyal intern, completely oblivious to the fact that he was a critical piece of this carefully constructed puzzle. I had almost a full day before their flight touched down, so I took the time to immerse myself in the city, not as a tourist, but as a strategist. I wandered the streets, noting where minor delays could be orchestrated. A cafe with a notoriously slow barista, a taxi company that frequently double-booked rides, a boutique hotel concierge who liked to play favorites. Every detail was a tool, every observation a potential weapon. When I returned to my apartment that evening, I had already mapped out their entire first day in Paris. Their hotel, a charming little place in Le Marais, had a rooftop terrace I could easily observe from a nearby building. I could see them checking in, navigating the streets, perhaps laughing, perhaps bickering over a tiny misunderstanding. Every reaction, every decision, every word would be mine to nudge. The first sign of their arrival came with a simple text from Alex. Landed safely. Clara's thrilled. She's buzzing about the hotel. I smiled at my phone, feeling a thrill that was almost wicked. My first psychological game was ready to begin. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, the kind of thing that would seem like chance, but I knew the impact it would have. I started with the taxi. Alex had booked a cab online to take them from the airport to the hotel, but I made a discreet call to the company, ensuring a minor delay. Nothing that would ruin their day, just enough to spark the tiniest seed of frustration. When they arrived at the hotel 15 minutes late, they found the lobby slightly crowded, the receptionist flustered, the concierge distracted. Small inconveniences, invisible to most people, but enough to plant subtle doubt in Clara's mind. Clara's reaction was exactly what I expected. She fumed slightly, whispering complaints to Alex about the delay, the crowded lobby, the fact that nothing seemed perfectly smooth. Alex, ever the devoted intern, apologized profusely, trying to smooth over every imperfection. And in that moment, I knew the first thread had been woven into the web. Over the next few hours, I watched from my hidden vantage points, following their movements like a shadow. Clara took photos constantly, her smile bright but slightly strained, her eyes flicking to Alex for reassurance. Alex, oblivious to my presence, guided her politely, adjusting plans on the fly, apologizing for minor hiccups, and I could feel the psychological tension building, almost imperceptibly, like a drumbeat growing louder in the background. I began experimenting with small, controlled manipulations. At the first cafe they visited, I had discreetly called ahead, asking the staff to place them at a table near the back, slightly away from the sunlight Clara loved for photos. Not a big deal, not enough for her to suspect anything, but enough to cause a subtle irritation, an adjustment in expectation. Clara frowned when she noticed, muttering about the table not being ideal, and Alex, of course, apologized again. The dynamic was exactly what I wanted. Clara, slightly frustrated, Alex, dutifully trying to fix things, and me, watching it all unfold. I was learning their patterns quickly. Clara's pride, her desire for everything to appear perfect, was both her strength and her vulnerability. She wanted Paris to be flawless, and even small deviations made her anxious. Alex's dedication made him an ideal buffer, but also a tool. He would execute tasks diligently, unaware that every action was nudging Clara toward a psychological edge. By evening, I had already begun planting doubts more directly. I sent an anonymous tip to the hotel concierge about a minor issue with their reservation, prompting a brief, confusing phone call to Alex that required him to clarify details he shouldn't have had to worry about. Clara's irritation spiked, her stress levels subtly elevated, and yet she laughed it off, thinking it was just bad luck. I smiled to myself. Perfect. As the night fell over Paris, I followed them through the streets from a safe distance. Clara insisted on walking along the Seine, marveling at the lights reflecting in the water. Alex kept pace, attentive and careful, making sure she didn't trip or get jostled by the evening crowd. And there I was, blending into the shadows, invisible but fully present, watching every step. I experimented with psychological nudges too. I noticed that Clara had a habit of relying on Alex for minor judgments. Which wine should we get? Or which cafe looks best? So I subtly influenced situations so that Alex had to make micro decisions under pressure, small conflicts or surprises that made him hesitate. Each hesitation was a tiny fracture, a small disruption in the illusion of smooth perfection that Clara expected. The most thrilling moment came at a small restaurant they had booked for dinner. I had already contacted the staff with a few subtle instructions. Ensure the table was slightly cramped, seat them near a noisy group, make sure service was just slow enough to create irritation but not disaster. The reactions were instantaneous. Clara complained softly to Alex about the noise, Alex tried to calm her, and the tension, barely perceptible to anyone else, was exactly what I wanted. By the end of their first day, I was already seeing patterns emerge. Clara's meticulous plans were unraveling. Subtly but surely, Alex, loyal and attentive, was doing everything right according to my manipulations, which only amplified Clara's stress when things didn't feel perfect. I was creating the perfect psychological storm without ever stepping into their line of sight. As I returned to my apartment that night, the city lights casting a soft glow over the rooftops, I reflected on the power of subtlety. This wasn't about overt revenge or dramatic confrontations. It was about control, influence, and the thrill of orchestrating events from the shadows. Every inconvenience, every miscommunication, every slight irritation was a tool, a way to destabilize Clara without her ever knowing who or what was behind it. And in that moment, I realized the true beauty of what I had created. Clara thought she was in charge of her romantic Paris adventure. She thought Alex was her faithful guide, her partner in exploration. She had no idea that the entire trip, every moment of it, was now being guided by someone she had betrayed. Someone who had been wronged, yes, but someone who had also become the invisible director of her unraveling. I leaned back, a quiet, dark smile forming. Paris was only the beginning. The games had just started, and I could feel the anticipation building like a storm on the horizon. I knew the next days would test their patience, their perceptions, their confidence, but every move would be mine to orchestrate. The city shimmered below me. Romantic, untouchable, beautiful. But to me, it was a chessboard. And Clara and Alex were already pieces moving exactly where I wanted them. Paris had a way of making everything feel larger than life, brighter and more intoxicating than anywhere else in the world. The Eiffel Tower glittered in the evening, the Seine flowed like liquid silver, and cafes hummed with soft conversation. To any observer, it would have been the perfect romantic escape. But I wasn't an observer. I was a conductor, orchestrating a symphony of chaos with precision and patience. By the third day of their trip, I could see the first real cracks forming. Clara had begun to notice that things weren't quite as seamless as she had imagined. A reservation that was slightly off, a street detour that didn't make sense, a table that wasn't exactly where she wanted it. Small, almost laughable inconveniences, but enough to make her pause and glance at Alex with a furrowed brow. Alex was still diligently performing his role, attempting to solve each problem as it arose. He was conscientious, loyal, and utterly unaware that his actions, while intended to smooth over imperfections, were feeding the very tension I had carefully seeded. I couldn't help but admire him. He was perfect for this. Perfectly unwitting, and yet he had no idea what he was enabling. I began escalating my tactics. Not enough to ruin their trip outright. No, that would be too obvious. But just enough to make Clara question her surroundings, her decisions, and her judgment. The first subtle maneuver involved their itinerary. I managed to get a minor cancellation at one of the museums they had planned to visit, forcing Alex to scramble for alternatives. Clara's irritation was immediate. "Why is it always something I don't understand?" she snapped quietly, her tone laced with frustration that she quickly masked with a laugh. Alex, of course, apologized and tried to make it right. I watched from a discreet distance, noting every glance, every sigh, every flicker of tension. Next, I introduced social embarrassment, carefully curated to remain anonymous. A small cafe where they had planned breakfast had a local street performer scheduled that day. I had made a quick, anonymous call to request a performance right next to their table. As the musician began playing, Clara froze for a second, caught off guard by the volume and proximity, while Alex jumped to adjust their seating. It was subtle, but I could see the ripple of self-consciousness pass over Clara. She laughed nervously, brushing it off, but the seed of doubt had been planted. I began to notice something else. The psychological games weren't just working on Clara, they were starting to affect Alex too, albeit in a much less obvious way. He had started noticing patterns, small inconsistencies, and minor coincidences that didn't make sense. Yet he trusted me implicitly. Every time he questioned the situation, he would somehow attribute it to bad luck or human error, never suspecting that I was the architect of these tiny disruptions. That trust was my shield, my secret weapon, and it made the games all the more delicious. But it wasn't all control and satisfaction. There were moments when I caught myself staring at Clara, remembering the mornings we'd spent laughing over burnt toast, the nights we'd stay up talking about nothing and everything at once, the way her eyes would light up when she was genuinely happy. The part of me that still loved her, the part that hadn't yet hardened completely, fought with the part of me that craved revenge. I won't lie, the internal struggle was intense. Every manipulation I enacted, every misstep I orchestrated, tugged at some residual affection I had for her. I reminded myself that this wasn't about cruelty, it was about justice, about reclaiming control over a situation where I had been blindsided and humiliated. But even as I rationalized it, I couldn't completely escape the pangs of nostalgia, the fleeting regrets, the moments of longing for what had been. Clara, for her part, began to sense that something was off. Her laughter was sharper, her smiles more guarded. The minor mishaps I orchestrated started to feel less like coincidences to her. She questioned small things. Did Alex make that reservation? I thought I asked him to confirm. Her tone held a subtle edge now, tinged with uncertainty. Alex reassured her, of course, but the seed of doubt had been planted. I could see it in her eyes. The beginning of paranoia, the first tremors of self-doubt. I decided to escalate further, testing the limits of both Clara's composure and Alex's reliability. At one of the more exclusive cafes along the Seine, I arranged for a mix-up in the seating. Clara, always particular, immediately noticed. "Alex, why did they give us that table? I didn't want to sit there," she whispered, voice sharp with barely contained irritation. Alex tried to smooth it over, smiling apologetically and explaining that it was beyond his control. And there it was, a perfect friction point. Clara's confidence wavered, Alex's loyalty was tested, and I remained invisible, orchestrating from the sidelines. The psychological impact on Clara grew as I continued to push the boundaries. I started dropping subtle hints, anonymous notes or small signs that made her question Alex's judgment and her own choices. A misdirected map, an unclaimed reservation at a boutique store, a double-booked tour, each minor setback compounded, building a subtle tension that Clara couldn't trace back to its source. Her mind, once confident and certain, now began to wobble, unsure of who to trust or what to believe. I observed her patterns meticulously. She had a routine, a rhythm to her behavior, a particular way she reacted under stress. I used that knowledge to my advantage, introducing calculated disruptions at times I knew would yield maximum psychological impact. Late arrivals, subtle contradictions in information, minor inconveniences, all carefully timed to keep her off balance. Yet even as I reveled in my control, I couldn't ignore the moments when my old feelings surfaced. Watching Clara, I felt flashes of the warmth we had shared, the intimacy that had once been effortless between us. But the betrayal cut deep, and I reminded myself that what I was doing now was necessary, not just for satisfaction, but as a lesson. She had underestimated me, and I was proving, quietly and meticulously, that she had made a grave mistake. Alex, meanwhile, remained loyal, perceptive yet blind to the orchestration around him. He noticed patterns, yes, small anomalies that he couldn't explain, but he never connected them to me. He still looked to me for guidance, still trusted my judgment implicitly. That trust was my foundation, the bedrock on which I could build the next phase of my plans. By the end of the day, Clara was beginning to question herself in ways I hadn't anticipated. A missed turn in the streets, a delayed tour, a minor argument over a reservation, each incident added to her growing paranoia. She looked at Alex with suspicion, questioning his competence, even as she clung to the reassurance he offered. And I remained a ghost, watching, guiding, shaping the narrative without ever revealing my presence. The internal tug-of-war within me grew more intense with each passing hour. I loved her once, perhaps still did in some irrational corner of my heart, but love had been poisoned by betrayal. Every manipulation, every inconvenience, every small victory in my game was tinged with bittersweet satisfaction. I reminded myself that I wasn't cruel. I was precise, deliberate, calculated. I wasn't hurting her for the sake of it. I was asserting control, reclaiming power, and teaching a lesson in the only language she would understand: consequences. As night fell over Paris, I reflected on the state of my psychological campaign. Clara's paranoia had begun to bloom. Alex's loyalty remained steadfast, but increasingly strained. I had created a delicate balance of tension, uncertainty, and anticipation. Every interaction, every small mishap, every slight embarrassment was carefully calibrated to destabilize Clara while keeping my identity hidden. And yet, amidst all the planning and observation, there was an undeniable thrill in seeing it unfold. This wasn't chaos, it was a meticulously designed sequence of events. A psychological experiment conducted with precision, patience, and attention to detail. Clara, for all her confidence and charm, had underestimated the depth of my planning, the subtlety of my execution, and the loyalty of my unwitting ally. She thought she was in control of her Parisian dream, that Alex was the architect of her adventure. She had no idea that I was the unseen hand, the invisible director, shaping every moment, orchestrating every twist, and watching the story unfold like a master storyteller. By the time I finally retired to my apartment that night, the city lights twinkling below me, I felt the tension settle into something almost tangible. Clara's grip on certainty had begun to loosen. Alex's confidence was quietly tested, and I remained fully in control, anonymous and omnipresent. Paris was no longer just a destination. It had become a chessboard. Clara and Alex were pieces moving exactly where I wanted them. Each interaction, each decision, each reaction, part of the grand strategy. And as I leaned back, a quiet, dark smile forming, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. The mind games had only just begun. The night air in Paris had a crisp edge that seemed to amplify every sound. The gentle rustle of leaves along the Seine, the distant hum of traffic, the faint clink of glasses from nearby cafes. It was beautiful, intoxicating, perfect for romance. And yet, for me, it had become the stage for something far more satisfying. The confrontation I had been meticulously building toward. I had watched Clara and Alex for days now, orchestrating minor inconveniences, subtle embarrassments, and psychological nudges that slowly chipped away at Clara's confidence while testing Alex's loyalty. Every tiny disruption, every carefully timed mishap had brought us to this exact moment. Tonight was the night. I had chosen the setting deliberately. The rooftop terrace of a luxury hotel overlooking the Eiffel Tower at night. Candles flickered along the edge, reflecting off the glass railings. The lights of the city below shimmered like stars scattered across the Seine. To anyone else, it would have been a scene out of a movie. Romantic, breathtaking, unforgettable. To me, it was a perfect arena. I arrived early, blending into the shadows of the terrace, watching as the staff prepared a table for two, anticipating the moment Clara and Alex would arrive. My heart was steady, my mind clear. This wasn't about chaos anymore. This was about precision. about the moment when the carefully constructed game would reach its climax. And then I saw them. Clara, radiant as ever, completely unaware of the storm about to crash over her carefully curated Parisian fantasy. Alex, devoted, eager, attentive, completely unaware of his role as the final piece in my plan. They approached the terrace hand in hand, or at least that's what I imagined Alex thought. I felt a surge of anticipation. I stepped out from the shadows just as they reached the table. The movement was subtle, deliberate, but enough to catch Clara's attention. "James," she breathed, her voice a mixture of disbelief, shock, and panic. Her eyes widened as recognition finally dawned, and I allowed myself a small, controlled smile. "Hello, Clara," I said quietly, letting the words hang in the air. Alex froze, his expression shifting from confusion to realization. "Wait, you're—" "Yes," I said calmly. "I'm the one she left behind, the one she thought she could replace so easily. And you, Alex, well, you were my unwitting partner in her little fantasy." Clara's face paled. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. I don't understand. How did you think this trip would be perfect?" I interrupted, voice steady, almost gentle. "Every delay, every mix-up, every small frustration, that was me. Every time you doubted Alex, every time you questioned a reservation, every time something didn't go perfectly, I was there, guiding the chaos from the shadows." Alex's eyes went wide. You planned all of this?" I nodded. "Every detail, every inconvenience, every minor embarrassment, every moment where you felt off balance, that was all part of the plan. I watched, observed, and waited until the moment was right to reveal myself." Clara's hands flew to her mouth, her eyes brimming with tears. "James, you thought you could just walk away, didn't you?" I said, my tone calm but edged with steel. "You thought I would take it quietly, accept betrayal without consequence. But here we are, and now you get to see the result of underestimating me." The realization hit her like a physical blow. Her entire body tensed. You've been following us? Watching us?" I shook my head slightly, a faint smile playing on my lips. "Not following, orchestrating. You see the difference, don't you?" Alex swallowed hard. "But I thought I was helping." You were," I said. "And that's what makes this so perfect. You executed my plan flawlessly without even knowing it. Every attempt to make Clara's trip perfect only highlighted the flaws I wanted to expose. You were my instrument, my shadow agent." Alex's face went pale. He looked at Clara, then back at me, struggling to reconcile loyalty, guilt, and shock. Clara, meanwhile, was trembling. Anger, shame, and fear flickered across her features. "James, I know what you thought," I interrupted gently. "I know exactly what you thought. But thoughts have consequences, Clara. Choices have consequences, and you made yours." Her voice trembled as she finally spoke, words barely audible. I didn't mean, I never thought." "You didn't think?" I echoed, letting the words sink in. "You didn't think about the person you were leaving behind. You didn't think about the trust you were breaking. You didn't think about the loyalty of the people around you. And now you're learning the hard way what happens when you underestimate someone." Clara's tears fell freely now. Alex's expression softened, conflicted, torn between defending her and understanding the truth. I didn't know," Alex said quietly. "I didn't know It doesn't matter," I said firmly. "You did what you thought was right and you followed orders, yes. But now you both get to face the consequences." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't scream or berate them. I let the weight of my presence, the calm inevitability of my words, and the precision of my planning do the work. And it worked. Claire trembled, the proud, confident woman. She had been reduced to a person grappling with guilt, humiliation, and shock. Alex, loyal to the end, was forced to confront the reality that his good intentions had been part of a carefully crafted plan of revenge. I could see the realization settling in. Clara's arrogance, her belief that she could escape accountability, was gone. Every smile, every laugh she had flaunted during the trip was stripped away, leaving only raw emotion. She had been outmaneuvered completely, and she knew it. And yet, I was not cruel for cruelty's sake. I had orchestrated consequences, yes, but I had not destroyed them completely. My aim had never been to ruin lives entirely. Clara needed to understand, to feel the weight of her choices, but I also wanted her to leave Paris with lessons learned, with the awareness that actions have ramifications and that betrayal is never without price. "You have a choice now," I said softly, finally allowing a hint of mercy to enter my voice. "You can take this as a moment to reflect, to understand what you've done, or you can continue to ignore it. But know this. The chaos you've experienced, the doubt, the frustration, that was a direct result of underestimating me." Clara's tears were silent now, but her shaking body spoke volumes. She nodded, small, almost broken. Alex remained quiet, processing, understanding, and perhaps even beginning to forgive himself for his unknowing role in my plan. For me, the satisfaction was exquisite. Not in the sense of cruelty, but in the precision, the inevitability of the moment. Every manipulation, every psychological nudge, Every inconvenience and embarrassment had led to this revelation. And now, standing on a rooftop terrace in Paris, with the city lights flickering like witnesses below, I could finally exhale. I had turned heartbreak into strategy, betrayal into action, and revenge into something calculated, precise, and entirely controlled. Clara had been confronted with the consequences of her choices. Alex had learned the limits of loyalty, and I had demonstrated, quietly but undeniably, that underestimating someone who had been wronged was a mistake one did not repeat. And as the night stretched on, filled with the soft hum of Paris and the distant glimmer of the Eiffel Tower, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. The game was over. The confrontation had been delivered. The lesson had been taught. And I had emerged not just as the one who had been wronged, but as the one who had orchestrated a flawless, invisible reckoning. Paris had been my stage, and I had played my part to perfection. The morning after the confrontation, Paris felt different. The city was the same cobblestone streets, the same cafes with their faint aroma of freshly baked croissants, the same glimmering Seine, but for me, it felt quieter, almost hollow. The tension that had charged every step of the past few days had dissipated, leaving only reflection and the faint, satisfying hum of control achieved. I had orchestrated, observed, and confronted. The game was over. I lingered on my apartment balcony one last time, watching the city awaken. Delivery trucks rattled along narrow streets, cafe chairs scraped softly against the pavement, and the occasional laugh floated up from a nearby terrace. Clara and Alex were still somewhere in Paris, processing, recovering, or perhaps trying to figure out how their vacation had gone so catastrophically off script. I didn't envy them, not really. It was poetic justice wrapped in subtlety and precision. I reflected on the whirlwind of emotions these past days had brought. Heartbreak, anger, betrayal, all of them had been raw, almost unbearable at first. But when channeled, when transformed into a strategy, they had become power, control, and clarity. Revenge, I realized, wasn't just about payback. It was about reclaiming your narrative, taking the pen back from someone who thought they could rewrite your story. Clara, I knew, was struggling. The realization that she had been outmaneuvered by someone she had once loved, or perhaps underestimated, was a heavy weight. Her pride would take longer to recover than her embarrassment. And Alex, loyal, devoted, unknowingly complicit, he would wrestle with guilt, frustration, and perhaps a dawning respect for how meticulous my planning had been. Both of them were left to confront the consequences of a story they hadn't fully understood until it was too late. I thought about Clara often during that quiet morning, not in the romantic, longing way I had once thought, but in the analytical way of someone studying a pattern, understanding the chain of cause and effect. Her choices had led here, her underestimation had been the catalyst, and she had played perfectly into the scenario I had envisioned. There was a strange satisfaction in that, a dark humor to the cosmic alignment of betrayal and reckoning. Packing my bags was almost ceremonial. Each item I placed in my suitcase felt like a symbol. The finality of my presence in Paris, the closing of a chapter, the assertion that I was leaving with lessons learned, wounds healed, and a story entirely my own. I double-checked my plans for leaving the city, ensuring that my departure was as seamless and untraceable as my interventions had been. As I walked through the streets one last time, I noticed the subtle echoes of my influence lingering everywhere. A cafe where they had struggled to find the right table. A boutique where a miscommunication had flustered Clara. A street performer who had unknowingly embarrassed her. All reminders that control, even unseen, leaves a mark. And I smiled quietly to myself, not out of malice, but out of satisfaction in a game well played. The flight home was smooth, uneventful, and, for the first time in days, I allowed myself a moment to breathe. Paris receded into the clouds below, its streets and lights becoming small and distant. I considered the aftermath, not just for Clara and Alex, but for myself. Heartbreak had been transformed into strategy, betrayal into empowerment, and every moment of doubt or frustration I had felt had been repurposed into clarity and precision. I was stronger, wiser, smarter, and I knew that next time, should there ever be a next time, I would navigate betrayal with an even sharper edge. Back home, life resumed its usual rhythm, but I noticed subtle changes in myself. I moved with more certainty, spoke with more purpose, and smiled with a sense of quiet superiority that came from knowing I had been in full control when others were blind to the forces shaping their reality. Claire's messages, which trickled in sporadically, were polite but strained, tinged with the awkwardness of someone who had miscalculated every move. Alex, ever diligent, kept correspondence professional, though I could sense in his words a quiet acknowledgement of the lessons he had learned. I let them stew. I didn't need to intervene further. The consequences of their choices were playing out naturally, and that was more satisfying than any dramatic confrontation could have been. I had delivered the lesson, allowed them to process it, and left the resolution in their hands. And in doing so, I realized that control wasn't about dominating every moment. It was about creating a structure in which others' actions naturally reinforce the narrative you intended. Yet, even in reflection, there was room for humor. A dark, private humor that only I fully appreciated. The idea that Clara had bragged to Alex about her perfect trip, only to be unknowingly sabotaged at every turn by the person she had thought she left behind. It was absurd, theatrical, and absolutely delicious. I chuckled quietly to myself, picturing her expressions, the flickers of frustration and disbelief, the subtle panic in her eyes. And then I allowed myself one final subtle twist. I hadn't just left Paris, I had left hints, breadcrumbs, little markers of my presence scattered throughout their trip. Nothing that would overtly reveal my machinations, but enough to seed lingering doubt. A slightly misaligned hotel booking here, a reservation subtly adjusted there, a minor miscommunication that would pop up later as a memory in her mind. A ghost of my influence, a reminder that she had never truly been in control. In a way, it was a statement. I had full control over the narrative, not just in Paris, but over the story that would follow them, the memory of what had happened, and the way they would interpret the chaos I had created. I had orchestrated consequences, observed reactions, and now, with subtle elegance, I had ensured that the echo of my presence would linger long after I was gone. As I settled back into my own apartment, I allowed the final reflection to sink in. Heartbreak had been real, betrayal had stung, but revenge, when executed with precision and patience, had been transformative. I had reclaimed control, restored balance, and emerged not just unscathed, but elevated, more strategic, more self-aware, more in command of the forces that shape lives and relationships. And in the quiet of that evening, with the city outside my window moving on without me, I allowed a small, dark laugh. The story was mine. Every move, every consequence, every reaction had been anticipated, guided, and subtly manipulated. Clara and Alex had played their parts to perfection, entirely unaware of the invisible hand directing the narrative. It was a story of betrayal, heartbreak, manipulation, and justice, but most importantly, it was a story that ended exactly as I intended. The Paris chapter was over, but the lesson lingered. The world could underestimate me, betray me, or think they had control. But as I had proven, the real power lies in observation, patience, and the quiet orchestration of events from the shadows. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I allowed one final, private thought, a flourish of dark humor to close the narrative. If anyone ever asked Clara about her perfect Paris trip, she would remember the frustration, the tension, the tiny inexplicable annoyances, and smile awkwardly, wondering what had really happened. And she would never, ever know that it had all been me. I leaned back in my chair, the night quiet and complete around me, and thought, not revenge, not anger, not heartbreak, control. That had been the true victory all along, and I had it, completely, undeniably, and with just the faintest, cleverest touch of satisfaction. The world was mine to observe, manipulate, and navigate. And if anyone else thought they could outmaneuver me, well, they were in for a story they'd never forget.